Hey, 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 time for another out of this world story from our space. I, 29 male, and X, 28 female, broke up after 7 years, and I'm having a hard time with defining and following up on boundaries moving forward and processing. My ex and I broke up 3+ weeks ago. We would have been together 8 years in December. It probably should have ended a few years ago in hindsight, but we loved each other even though it was obviously not working. For background, the honeymoon period lasted about a year. She is very much a free spirit, and I have not been without a job since I was 16 for more than 3 days. She was couch surfing, and I had an extra room from a previous relationship that had ended a few months before. We skipped a lot of the precursor relationship moments, and she moved in early. First, as just having a place to stay, then obviously a relationship formed. She ended up leaving her job after the second year, and I supported both of us for about 6 months. She looked for jobs, and at first I encouraged her to take her time so that it wouldn't have to be a job she hated. Towards the end of that period, working overtime in a job where you work 2 16s and an 8, taking the bus as a car payment wasn't feasible. And only making $10 an hour. I told it she needed to get a job ASAP, as I was generally worried I was doing actual damage to myself. She ended up getting a job, but only after I came to the point that we needed to live with my parents to make ends meet. The job she got, she left before we could move out of my parents. Bless my parents for being so supportive even though they didn't really see why I loved her. I made it clear at that point that having active work or spending a work week worth of time looking for jobs was a requirement for me to be able to continue the relationship in good faith. I said I didn't care how much she makes, I just wanted a relationship based on equal effort and balanced responsibility. She got a job next to the apartment we would be moving into, and I ended up getting a job working for our state, which is the best in our work sector. We both worked as caregivers, she for dementia care and I for adults with disabilities. Everything was starting to look good. I taught her some budgeting techniques at the time, and we started working towards a shared dream. We wanted 3 properties across the county, a truck, and a tiny house. This would appeal to her free spirit, and I am a simple man who just requires space for a computer. A laptop would do, a digital piano, and a guitar. The budget never worked. I tried more than 10+ times to change the budget, tried different mediums like envelopes, spreadsheets, Axe, and even bank tracking. For the remainder of our relationship, I fully intended on proposing as soon as I knew a $500 ring wouldn't be a dumb purchase. We never got more than $750 in savings. I even told her my intention. She ended up getting employed by the state, and our combined salary was $80K a year. Still no savings. Keep in mind my main purchases were a good internet connection, about $200 a year, upgrading a computer part when needed, and a one-time $300 purchase of a digital piano. The piano was $1,200, but I offered what I could and promised it would get played every day. It was very kind of the seller to accept. I always cut costs where I could. My computer was Franken-built from various Craigslist advertisements. The money was spent eating out, sometimes 3 times a week. Cigarettes, I vaped because it was much cheaper building my own coils and getting juice wholesale from local sellers. Gym memberships that were never used, $40 to $80 of marijuana a month, and lots of other more frivolous things. And her alcohol. I didn't realize how much she spent on alcohol along the way, but it was a problem and she really struggled to manage it. It was never a problem during the day, but after 4 or 5 p.m., she would drink. We even had a year of living at my grandparents' house while they RV'd, where we didn't have to pay a rent if we took care of the house, yard work, and mailed them their mail. During that time, I was able to buy my first car. On financing. She got let go from her job after that purchase. Took another 4 months to find stable work. Getting fired once along the way, a week in. She got a different job with the state, but hated it from day one. I ended up seeking help for my use of nicotine and caffeine, with a couple tokes after work each day of cheap stuff, as I couldn't handle anything good without anxiety. I was honest with my psychologist and ended up with an ADHD diagnosis. I started treatment. It was like I was opening my eyes and seeing our relationship for the first time. I stopped any marijuana consumption, reduced caffeine to a cup of coffee a day, we had been 2 energy drinks a day baseline, and then quit nicotine using a cessation aid. During that time, I started talking about needing to know we were going to get serious or needing to acknowledge that we weren't going to work out. This was the beginning of this year. She ended up getting a psyche eval as well, but was undiagnosable due to her now heavier drinking. I felt for her, especially watching me start whipping into shape all the while. She and her counselor talked, and she brought up maybe moving into her own place and focusing on herself. I said I would support if she needed to, as I wanted her to be happy, but I also made it clear that I really needed her to seek her own path or commit to our path, like I had a long time ago. She ended up deciding to commit, but 2 months later was having the same kind of feeling again. At this point, I gave her the deadline of August to decide one way or the other. She ended up wanting to get a puppy, a beautiful and intelligent shepherd mix, as she thought that needing to walk a dog every day and maintain a schedule might help on many levels. I ended up taking care of, training, and maintaining the schedule for that puppy. Cut to 3 weeks ago. I wake up and she tells me she's going to live in California for a month or two and find herself while working a job in front of hers had lined up. I said I was sad to see her go, but at this point, I just want her to do what she needs to secure her own happiness. She seemed confused, saying that she will come back, and then it hit me. She expected me, after all these talks and struggles with stability and responsibility, to be okay with it. Suddenly paying bills alone, taking care of her cat and puppy. The puppy was functionally mine now, while she wanted to find herself. I explained that if she left, that I intend to move on and hopefully eventually each of us can find a partner with less compatibility issues. I wanted to be moving on to land ownership and she wanted to be exploring. I told her I won't resent her, I love her, but that it was definitely time to move on. I started doing so. A few days later, she offhand mentioned she might not be leaving, and at that point I made it clear either way that I won't be pursuing a romantic relationship any longer. She ended up leading. I was relieved, and each day revealed how toxic our relationship had become. Not in the fighting, yelling, petty way. More, it was related to stagnation, alcohol abuse, and the fact that every day I took care of people and then came home and took care of her emotionally. I loved her and didn't realize how much of a chore that emotional burden had been. During all of this time, about 3 months ago, my grandfather passed away. I tried talking to her about how that was really hitting me hard, and she ended up making it about herself. I started school a couple months ago, after having dropped out of school 9 years ago, and she just complained about not having as much time with me. I traded shifts with a coworker to work nights. This allowed me, with my boss's permission, to study during downtime. Additionally, I slept while she worked and had every evening set aside for time with her. She complained we weren't sleeping at the same time. Really, she was just unhappy, and seeing me succeed was painful for her. It was painful for me to watch her suffer too. I ended up smoking again. A little more than a month ago, I had given up hope and was accepting that this was over. Then, she brought up California. The current situation. Things have been getting progressively better for me since she left. Then, yesterday she calls me. She brings up her struggles. I listen while maintaining solidarity on my decision. We talked about some of the things that worked and didn't work in our relationship. It felt like a good post-mortem relationship analysis with both of us contributing. It felt like progress in the right direction for me. I iterated that if we are going to remain friends, we both need to acknowledge that the romantic relationship is over. I told her that if I ended up with someone else, I want to respect that relationship the same way I respected ours. That means she either needs to accept this or we need to cease communication. I had an old ex from before our relationship contact me while we were dating under the guise of friendship. All transparency communicated to my now ex at the time. When that ex started getting weird about it, I told her we couldn't talk anymore and communicated that transparently as well at the same time. Then I said that, while I was happy to hear from her, I still am moving on and feel I can only handle contact about once a week at most while I'm healing. I woke up today to a huge text from her talking about why she left among other details, and I read it, but couldn't believe how quickly she broke the boundary I set. I iterated in no uncertain terms, as respectfully as possible, that I was upset she threw that boundary out the window. I added why I left. Then I told her I want her to be happy and I need her to let me be happy too. I need to be able to move on. I felt comfortable handling all this up to now, as comfortable as she can be during the end of a relationship that was this long. Now I just don't know what to do if she ends up pushing this issue. I don't want to cut her out completely, but I want to secure my path forward. I still love and care about her as a person, but I don't want to end up being her support while trying to heal my own wounds. Any thoughtful help would be appreciated. Let's get the reaction from the community. Big N CV has a very thoughtful response. Oofed, buddy. You are doing all the right things already. I don't think I can emphasize enough just how much you are nailing it right now. I can't fault any of the conclusions you've drawn, and I have some experience with this. I've typed out the full story so many times on Reddit that I'm reticent to do it again, but I essentially had a similar situation with my last partner. Bought a house, both employed, working toward the end game. We've our problems, but we're committed. Then, within a month of signing on the dotted line, she moves out of the flat and started dating a coworker. When you've been through so many transformative experiences with that person by your side, it's incredibly hard to walk away, especially if you see them struggling or in pain now that you've gone. But If I may permit myself to criticize one aspect of how you're handling this, you need to fully commit to what you said you'd do. The whole point of her moving to California and leaving you on your ass with all the responsibilities is for her to find herself, to stand on her own, to get the measure of herself and be tested. She cannot do that if she knows you're always going to be waiting on the wings to provide emotional support and validation. She needs to experience life without you, because being deprived and unhappy is a catalyst for change and growth. My ex-partner was my best friend and I loved her to death. When it was clear she was having an affair, I still made myself constantly available to her. I actively hid the truth from my family as I knew she'd be devastated if she knew they thought less of her. I maintained contact at all times, nominally, so that we could organize things like selling of the house, shared assets, etc. But in reality, it was so I could keep an eye on her whilst she engaged in this obviously self-destructive path and, hopefully, make her come to her senses. Sickeningly, I even gave her advice and emotional support when her new relationship began to sour and her self-worth was at its lowest. I actively wounded myself to ensure she never bore the brunt of the consequences of her own actions. I isolated myself from my own support network because she was my best friend, because I loved her. But at a certain point, my involvement with her became toxic. I'd pinball between seeing her as the woman I loved going through an existential crisis and seeing her as the human pinnacle of cowardice and cruelty. These feelings existed in me simultaneously. I couldn't disassociate one from the other. I'd insist on being in her life and being there for her, whilst erupting with anger and bitterness nearly every time we spoke. Every interaction with her after our split soured my perception of her and our relationship. It got to a point where I tried to cut off contact numerous times, and when she eventually revealed she'd be moving countries, I actively urged her to do it so we could leave each other alone. We were destroying each other. It's been 3 years now. We're both in new relationships, and we don't speak beyond the occasional birthday message or Happy Christmas. That period was easily the hardest time of my life, but it led to so many fantastic and amazing things, not the least of which a new partner and a new lease on life, new hobbies, new jobs, new opportunities and experiences. These are all the things that are in store for you both. But you need to let go, completely. I wasted so much time and needlessly harmed myself, but trying to maintain a quasi-friendship or a space for myself in her life when there was none. Do not make the same mistake as me. Learn to see her and your relationship for what they are. It's over. It's done. Pull the trigger and make it clean. You are both needlessly harming each other.